Hi, this video is about social contract theory, and in this video you can see from the board a little bit. I'm gonna show how social contract theory had its genesis in the thinking of Thomas Hobbes from the 1600s, and how it ties in with recent concepts called social justice, and how that might be what's called social subjectivism. And I'm going to compare it to some alternative ways of thinking. Currently in our politics in America, we have a lot of special interest groups, and they're each vying for some kind of a monetary or legal status from the government, all coming to the same government trough. I'll show how that, if you boil that down, it's really gang dominance or gang warfare on a semi-peaceful scale, because it's never peaceful to take somebody's livelihood away from them. Male versus female, black versus white, gay versus straight, rich versus poor. There's a lot of ways that you can divide the country using the concept of social justice and into special interest groups. And by dividing the country like that, you can kind of conquer the country if you're the right kind of president or president and advisors. And then at the end I'll offer a rebuttal to it all. I'm going to first start by reading from Hobbes. We can see where this idea of social contract came from. It says, "Whatsoever therefore is consequent to a time of war, where every man is enemy to every man, the same is consequent to the time wherein men live without other security than what their own strength and their own invention shall furnish them withal. In such a condition there is no place for industry, because the fruit thereof is uncertain, and consequently no culture of the earth, no navigation, nor use of commodities imported by sea, no commodious building, no instruments of moving and removing, such things as require much force, no knowledge of the face of the earth, no account of time, no arts, no letters, no society, and which is worst of all, continual fear and danger of violent death, and the life of man, solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. To this war of every man against every man, this also is consequent, that nothing can be unjust. The notions of right and wrong, justice and injustice, have there no place. Where there is no common power, there is no law. Where no law, no injustice." So what Hobbes is saying in a so-called state of nature is that men will rape, murder, kill, pillage, and burn each other. And if you look at some tribes, if you look at whether it's African tribes or American Indian tribes, yeah, there was a lot of savage, brutal killing. You could say that's a state of nature, I guess, that men coalesce into tribes, and those tribes tend to be at war. Well, let me keep reading with Hobbes. "For all men are by nature provided of notable multiplying glasses, that is, their passions and self-love, through which every little payment appeareth a great grievance, but are destitute of those perspective glasses, namely moral and civil science, to see far off the miseries that hang over them, and cannot without such payments be avoided." So what Hobbes is saying is with our natural desires and fears, we're going to be in this state of nature kind of helpless. And what we really need is some philosopher king to guide us, to actually help us evolve in a society that's tightly controlled. By controlling our passions and fears, by scaring us to death with a powerful government, Hobbes says there can be peace among men. But we're going to have to find among us someone who's willing to rule other men in this great Leviathan. So he's setting up the case to sell a product. The product he's selling is totalitarian dictatorship. He calls the Leviathan. It's a large, powerful government where everybody's in fear of the government, and they will therefore not exercise their animalistic desires to hunt down and kill each other. You can ask yourself whether you personally, do you feel like hunting down and killing people? I don't. But anyway, here's the resolution. Of course, you start. If you're a good salesman, you'll say that there's a big problem and that you're offering a resolution to that problem. And here's Hobbes on the resolution. So that the nature of justice consisteth in keeping of valid covenants, but the validity of covenants begins not but with the constitution of a civil power, sufficient to compel men to keep them. And then it is also that propriety begins, where people can own some things, exchange things in a marketplace. So Hobbes is saying basically, you got to have this big, strong government, or people are going to just rob each other blind, rape each other, kill each other. It's in our nature to be savage beasts. And we're going to have this society that runs roughshod against human nature, and in doing so, we create this great moral outcome. Okay, so that's the argument for a social contract, is that you ought to agree to a contract with society because you're such an evil person to begin with, and everybody else is. You'd never be safe without the exact country that you live in. You know, people in China could hear the same argument. Well, you need to sign on to the social contract because without the Chinese government protecting you, you would be, destitute at each other's throats. But is that really true? Did they need that specific form of Chinese communist / half capitalist government? Probably not. They'd do well without that form of government. So they didn't. So the argument from the social contract theorist that you needed the very specific form of government that you've been getting, it's a begging the question argument, a fallacy, that you needed exactly what you had gotten in order to be where you are. The same argument works in every country, no matter how totalitarian, no matter how poor. You can always say to the people, but without us, you'd be worse off. Because it presumes something is trying to prove. So the social justice part is where we look at outcomes that we want, basically. It's a subjectivist. Some people who are advocates of social justice will say that blacks need a whole lot of reparations, or they'll say that gays need, or they'll say that the poor, they need a whole lot more from the rich, or they'll say men need a whole lot more from women. If you're in a fundamentalist Muslim country, that might be the case, where it's argued that men need a whole lot more from women, and women are kind of like second-class citizens. In Saudi Arabia, they might not be able to drive, they may not be able to declare a divorce from their husband. It's not equal, it's based on feelings, and that's what we call social justice. When you want your feelings to trump actual justice, that's really what social justice is. So it's a social subjectivism, and by that I mean subjectivism of many minds, a whole bunch of people thinking a certain way. In the case of Saudi Arabia, a whole bunch of people think that women shouldn't drive. Okay, that's social subjectivism. It's true. Why? Because of a whole bunch of people believe it. That's not really objectively true that women shouldn't drive, but it's subjectively true when you look at Saudi Arabia. And so it leads to this special interest group dominance, of groups fighting against each other. It's kind of like a gang warfare. It kind of leads to a culture of corruption itself. So even if we didn't have corruption, social justice and special interest group warfare would create corruption out of nothing. The argument itself is not very good. It begs a question, saying you needed the society to be exactly the way it was to be where you exactly are. It ignores the idea that people could defend themselves, that before large societies, maybe people did defend themselves. Maybe theft was looked down upon in some cases. Maybe murder was looked down upon, fought against. Maybe there's natural inalienable human rights, individual rights, that help fortify someone psychologically to prevent them from being raped and murdered and killed, and they'll coalesce with like-minded others and defend their freedoms, that they'll consistently know about the benefits of freedom and want to defend it. When the Founding Fathers signed the Declaration of Independence, there were enough people in America that understood what it meant to be free. Well, they understood what it meant to be controlled, and that wasn't good enough for them, and they were willing to risk their lives. They say, pledge their lives, fortunes, and sacred honor. They were willing to risk things for that. So can people out of their own heart create a similar circumstance? Yes, it's true. While it might be true that you didn't build that for a certain road or bridge, it's not true that you wouldn't have built that. Okay, so we don't need a social contract. The argument itself presumes that human nature is savage. Just look within your own heart. Do you consider yourself a savage? I don't consider myself a savage. I wouldn't want to live with myself if I were a murderer, rapist, killer. And maybe there's a lot of people, maybe millions and millions of people, who also believe that. And we would have formed our own society anyway. So we don't have to sign on to a social contract. The same could be done in communist China. North Korea. North Korea is a great example. There's a lot of poverty there. If you look at satellite photos of North Korea, it's always dark. There's no electricity, hardly any. None that show up compared to South Korea. So the North Korean government could also say, you know, without us, you'd be so much more worse off. Therefore, you have to give up your rights, your freedoms. You have to play by the rules and hypothetically sign this social contract. But you wouldn't have had to be where you are. In fact, North Koreans would be a lot better without their government, with something in its place. They're a great example. All right, thank you for listening.